Have you ever been judged before anyone even knew your name? Have you ever sat in a place you rightfully earned, only to be told you don't belong there? That's exactly what happened to Ava Coleman, a black woman, a CEO, a leader who worked her whole life to earn her seat. Until one morning, on Flight DL729 from Atlanta to New York, a stranger, a white businessman, looked her in the eye and said, "You must be mistaken. This isn't your seat." In that moment, Ava faced a choice we all might one day face. Do you fight for your dignity or stay silent to keep the peace? Imagine it was you. Imagine everyone watching, waiting to see what you'll do. Your heart races, but your voice, steady, because sometimes the quietest strength changes everything. 5 minutes later, the flight was halted, and what happened next would shake the internet, change lives, and remind millions of people what respect truly means. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's a story about power, humanity, and the courage to stay calm when the world tests you most. So before we begin, take a deep breath, open your heart, and ask yourself, what would you do if your seat, your worth, was questioned? If this story touches something inside you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see people forever. Early morning at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The air is a mix of the smell of roasting coffee, the sound of loudspeakers calling flights, and the soft light of dawn shining through the giant glass windows. The first rays of sunlight fall on the waiting seats, reflecting on the suitcases and on the faces of hundreds of people hurrying to different destinations. Ava Coleman carried her silver-gray suitcase lightly, walking with the air of someone accustomed to a busy life. Her navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a bun, and her black high heels gave her an air of confidence, but not arrogance. Her first-class boarding pass, printed with the name Ava L. Coleman, Novaterra Technologies, gleamed in the light. She had just finished a long meeting in Atlanta, preparing to fly to New York to speak at the Women Leading the Future of Business conference. In her head, her ideas were still forming, word by word, opening sentence by sentence. This speech was not only a career opportunity, but also a chance to say what she believed, that success has no color. When the announcement for the boarding gates of Flight DL729 rang out, Ava smiled slightly and let out a long breath. She loved moments like this, quiet, orderly, stress-free. She liked flying early because first class was usually quiet enough to read or close her eyes. Entering the cabin, she nodded slightly to the young stewardess standing at the door. "Good morning. Welcome aboard." The girl smiled, her eyes bright and her voice cheerful. "Good morning," Ava replied, her voice low, warm, a little tired, but polite. The air in first class smelled of fresh leather. Soft white light reflected through the windows. Everything seemed perfect until she saw her seat 2O. A middle-aged man was sitting there. Gregory Mills, white shirt, black vest, neatly combed blonde hair, one hand holding a phone, the other twirling a glass of red wine. Without raising his head, he spoke before she could. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said curtly, with a hint of disdain. "First class is full today. You might want to check the back." The air around them seemed to drop. Ava stood still for a few seconds, looking at the chair, then at the man. She frowned slightly, but kept her voice gentle. "Sir, I believe this is seat 2A. That's the number on my boarding pass." Gregory smiled faintly, not looking up. "You sure about that? Maybe you misread. Happens all the time. Then he took a sip of wine, his eyes still glued to the phone screen, as if her presence didn't matter. Ava stood, saying nothing. The other passengers began to silently glance. Some pretended to read magazines. Others looked away. She could feel the familiar air, the heavy silence when people witness wrongdoing but choose not to. Another stewardess approached, her voice trembling slightly. "Sir, could I please check your boarding pass?" Gregory raised his eyes, his expression authoritative. "I've flown this route every week for years. This is my seat. I'm not moving." The stewardess paused. Her gaze shifted awkwardly between the two of them. Ava looked at the girl, not angry, just a silent message. Just do your job. But inside Ava, a familiar feeling rose, a quiet, needle-like hurt when you're doubted for who you are, not for what you're doing wrong. She took a deep breath, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. "Here we go again," she thought. "How many times have I been in these places proving the obvious?" A passenger behind him muttered, "Is there a problem?" Gregory glanced up, smiling faintly. "No problem. Just a mix-up. She probably belongs in coach." A soft laugh broke out from somewhere, very small, but loud enough for Ava to hear. In a split second, she had a choice to react or to stay calm. She had learned that sometimes silence was louder than anger. Ava opened her phone and sent a short message to her assistant, Claire Sanders. "On board Flight DL729. Someone's in my seat. Handle quietly, please." She didn't need to say much. Claire would know what to do. When she put the phone away, Gregory's eyes were still triumphant. "See, no need to make this a big deal." Ava looked straight at him, her voice calm. Respectfully, "Sir, I'm not making a scene. I'm simply standing where I'm supposed to be." The air seemed frozen. The sound of the engine outside the window mingled with the steady beat of her heart in her chest. She had no idea that in 5 minutes this flight would not be able to take off, and that this ordinary moment would become a story that would make the whole of America talk about justice and dignity. She stood there, calm as if time had stopped. A storm was coming, but Ava Coleman was ready. Ava Coleman stood still in the narrow aisle of first class, holding a small suitcase, her eyes calm but deep as the surface of an autumn lake. She could feel every gaze furtively observing her. Some were curious, some were avoiding, some were annoyed because the flight was delayed by a few minutes. The sound of the engine outside seemed to fade away, giving way to a heavy silence between the rows of shiny brown leather seats. Gregory Mills put his glass down on the table, turned around, his voice even but sharp. "Listen, ma'am. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe you printed your ticket wrong. You people always mix things up." The phrase "you people" hit Ava like a cold needle. She had heard it countless times in her head, at conferences, in boardrooms, in the first interviews of her career. A seemingly gentle way of speaking, but one that carried layers of prejudice that spanned generations. The young flight attendant, Leah Parker, approached. She looked at her laptop screen, then at Gregory. "Sir, our system shows that seat 2A belongs to Ms. Coleman. Your seat is 3B. Gregory frowned, leaned back in his chair, and smiled sarcastically. "That can't be right. I always sit here, every Monday morning. I know this seat better than I know my office chair." Leah paused, her hand tightening on the small notebook. She glanced at Ava, then back at Gregory. "I'm sorry, sir, but if you could just—" Gregory interrupted, his voice louder, clearly intended for everyone to hear. "Young lady, I pay for first class. I don't intend to argue with someone who probably got upgraded by mistake." The cabin froze. A man in row 1C coughed, pretending to adjust his headphones. An older woman turned her head away. No one said anything. Ava took a deep breath. She could hear her own heartbeat slowing. She had spent most of her life learning to breathe in moments like this. Because when a black woman gets angry, they don't just see anger, they see prejudice reinforced. She knew that, and she vowed never to let someone else's anger define her. She smiled slightly, unwavering. "Sir, I assure you, I don't need an upgrade. I bought this seat weeks ago." Gregory snorted, leaned back, and smiled faintly. "Well, congratulations then. Maybe next time double-check before boarding." Leah looked at them, her face showing her dilemma. There was a vague fear in her eyes, fear of offending the VIP, fear of causing trouble, fear of being reprimanded after the flight. She had never faced a situation like this before, and her heart was in a silent tug-of-war. On one side was the professional rules. On the other was the sense of right and wrong that her heart was whispering. Ava turned her head and looked around. Her gaze swept over the silent passengers. No one spoke. She understood. Silence was a way for people to protect themselves. But in that moment, she also felt the utter loneliness of facing injustice with no one on their side. Ava's phone vibrated. A text message from Claire Sanders popped up. "Contacted Delta customer support. They are verifying the information. Stay calm, Ava." She nodded slightly, putting away the phone. The feeling of relief was fleeting, then gone as quickly as a breath. Gregory was on the phone with someone. "Yeah, it's ridiculous. Some lady says I took her seat. Can you believe it? Yeah, apparently she's what's the word? CEO or something." A soft chuckle came from the other end. Then his reply. "Exactly. You'd think they'd know their place by now." The words rang out loud in the small space of first class. Leah looked down, her lips pressed together. Ava was silent, but her eyes changed. They were no longer resigned. They were the eyes of someone who knew she had to stand up not to prove anything, but to avoid betraying her own pride. "Mr. Mills," she said, her voice even and soft, "I'm not here to argue. I'm just asking for the same respect you'd give any other passenger." Gregory raised his head, his eyes mocking. "Respect is earned. Sweetheart." Leah gasped. She couldn't take it anymore. "Sir, please lower your voice." She spoke softly, but clearly. Gregory turned to her, his voice harsh. "You're defending her now. You realize who you're talking to." Leah took a half step back, but didn't break eye contact. Ava put down her suitcase, unlocked the seat opposite her, and sat down gently. It wasn't a surrender, but a deliberate choice. She didn't want this to become a scene in front of everyone, but inside her, a wave of emotions surged and subsided. It was like standing in the middle of a storm and knowing full well that she wouldn't let the wind blow it away. Outside the window, the Atlanta sky turned pale blue. The sun was already up, its light hitting the chairs, creating a path that seemed endless. Ava looked out, and her mind flashed with the image of her mother, the woman who had worked as a janitor in a small hotel and had taught her that dignity is not determined by the uniform you wear. The words echoed in her heart now, as clear as a voice from the past. Leah returned to the small service counter and dialed the intercom. "Captain Carter, we have a seating issue in first class." The voice from the radio responded, deep and calm. "Understood. I'll be there shortly." The first-class cabin fell silent again. Ava closed her eyes for a few seconds. exhaling. She didn't know what was coming, but she had a feeling it wouldn't be easy. Gregory continued to mumble complaints, his words like small cuts in the already stuffy air. A passenger in row 1C, a middle-aged man with graying hair, turned to Ava and whispered, "I'm sorry you have to go through this, ma'am." It was all she could say, but Ava smiled. "Thank you," she replied, a small word, but enough to warm her heart. Leah stepped forward and placed a hand gently on Ava's shoulder. "The captain is on his way," she whispered. There was something in her eyes, a clumsy but sincere sympathy. Ava nodded. "Thank you. Leah." Gregory curled his lips and said softly, calling the captain now over her seat, "This is ridiculous." Ava looked at him, calm, her gaze not angry but strangely peaceful. "Sometimes, sir, it's not about the seat. It's about what people think they can take from you." No one responded. The words seemed to hang in the air, touching everyone and then fading away, leaving behind a different kind of silence, no longer cold, but deep and thoughtful. In a few minutes, the captain's footsteps would be heard, setting off a chain of events that no one in that cabin would ever forget. But right now, in the soft light of early morning, Ava Coleman sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the window. Little did she know, this moment of silence would become the prelude to a storm that would rock the media world. The first-class door closed, the sound of the engines outside fading into the thick insulation. The space seemed to shrink to nothing but breathing, eyes, and silence. Ava Coleman sat still, her hands resting lightly on the leather bag in her lap, her shoulders still straight. Next to her, Gregory Mills still looked smug, like someone who had just won an unequal argument. He flipped through the airline magazine, pretending it was all over. But Ava knew nothing was over. 100 voices echoed in her mind, all of them rooted in one thing: prejudice. She remembered yesterday morning, back in the California office. Claire Sanders had reminded her about her speech in New York, that she should rest and take it easy. People won't just listen to your speech, Ava. They'll look at you, the successful black woman in tech. You're proof of what they doubted. Ava had laughed at the time, thinking Claire had exaggerated. Now, sitting in front of a man who had taken her seat because he thought she didn't belong, Ava realized Claire was right. It seemed like with every step she took, someone was silently asking, "Are you sure you're qualified to sit here?" Leah's wheelchair wheels clanged softly behind her. The young flight attendant busied herself preparing for the flight, but she couldn't hide her nervousness. Every now and then, Leah's eyes would glance at Ava, a silent apology in them. Ava caught her gaze and smiled. Not a forced smile, but the smile of someone who understood that even the onlookers were trapped in their own fear. Gregory suddenly spoke up. "You know, I run a company too. We deal with people from all over. But it's funny, the kind of people you meet up here in first class these days." The sentence echoed in the quiet space like a blunt knife, not sharp enough to cause physical harm, but strong enough to cut deep into self-esteem. Ava turned her head to look out the window. The early morning sunlight filtered through the plane's wings, spreading on the glass. She sighed softly. In that moment, she wanted to leave, wanted to get away from that cold gaze, but reason kept her here. She closed her eyes, and a flashback to her early career flashed through her mind. A young Ava, in her early 20s, fresh out of college, walked into a conference room full of white men in suits. They looked at her, briefly surprised, then politely but indifferently. One asked, "Are you an assistant or an intern?" Ava remembered the feeling clearly, a mixture of embarrassment and determination. She didn't answer, just turned on her computer and presented a plan that was signed off on the same day. But the feeling of having to prove she wasn't in the wrong room never went away. And today, at 42, she was still proving the same thing, just in a different form. Leah stepped closer, leaned down and whispered, "Ms. Coleman, Captain Carter's on his way. Please wait a moment." Ava nodded her thanks, her voice light as the wind. "Don't worry, Leah. I'm fine." The flight attendant looked at Ava, seeing no anger in her eyes, only a calmness that made her feel a sudden respect. As Leah walked away, Ava tilted her head slightly, looking at Gregory. He was still flipping through Forbes magazine, his eyes skimming the headline, "The Future of Diversity in Leadership," not realizing the paradox that lay right in front of him. Ava felt two emotions running parallel: hurt and control. Hurt because of the repeated injustice. Control because she chose not to react like a victim. She knew that if she lost her temper, the papers would write that a black woman caused a disturbance on a plane. But if she remained silent, that silence would empower people like Gregory to believe they had the right to insult others without being held accountable. The phone in her pocket vibrated again. Claire texted Ava, "The airline has confirmed you are correct. They are contacting the captain. Remain seated." Ava read the message, smiling slightly. She placed her hand on her chest, feeling her heart beat slowly. Sometimes justice comes slowly, but it always finds its way, she thought. Gregory glanced over and saw the smile. "Something funny?" he asked, his voice sarcastic. Ava looked at him, her eyes soft and deep. "No, just thinking about how patience works better than arrogance." Gregory smirked, about to respond, but then fell silent. Perhaps he sensed the unspoken power in her voice. A woman in row 2B some 50, dressed in a smart gray dress, leaned slightly. "Ms. Coleman," she said quietly, "I saw the whole thing. I just want to say, I admire how you keep your composure." "I'm not sure I can do that." Ava looked at her, a small smile on her face. "Thank you. Sometimes silence speaks volumes." The woman nodded, her eyes filled with respect. Outside, the light changed as the plane began to close its doors in preparation for departure. Leah hurried over to her colleague on the radio. "Hold departure. Captain's request." The reply was short and decisive. The whole cabin seemed to know what was going on behind the scenes. Gregory looked annoyed. "Now what? We're not leaving yet." "This is absurd." Ava didn't answer. She opened her tablet and scrolled through the speech she'd prepared. The words appeared: leadership through dignity. She read each sentence over, feeling like fate was testing her to see if she truly believed what she was saying. Led with dignity, not power, not fame, but maintaining dignity in the places where it's easiest to lose. Gregory let out a sigh and tossed the magazine onto the table. "I can't believe this drama is holding everyone up." Ava closed her computer and looked at him, her voice soft but firm. "Sometimes a few minutes can decide whether we move forward as people or just keep circling the same ignorance." Gregory turned away, not speaking. Perhaps for the first time during the conversation, he felt confused. The cabin fell silent again. Leah looked at her watch, fingering the pen on her notebook. Ava relaxed her shoulders and closed her eyes. She remembered her father, who had said, "You will have to work twice as hard to achieve what others consider normal. But don't let that make you bitter." Today, the words rang like an old song in her mind. A few minutes later, footsteps sounded behind them, steady and weighty. Leah raised her head, Captain Carter's here." The cabin fell silent. Ava opened her eyes. Gregory turned, a look of surprise on his face. A tall, dark man with silver-streaked hair and the calm eyes of a man who had flown thousands of hours entered the cabin. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep, clear, and commanding. "I'm Captain Daniel Carter." He paused, looked around. Then his eyes fell on Ava and Gregory. "I understand there's a seating issue." Gregory chuckled. "There's no issue, Captain. Just a misunderstanding with this lady here." Ava didn't speak. She just looked at the captain, feeling the calm and dignity in his eyes. He nodded slightly at her, a small but warm gesture. In that moment, Ava knew the storm was coming, and this time she wouldn't be alone. The air in first class was so thick that Leah Parker felt as if every breath was heavy. She stood near the small counter, her hands clasped together, staring at the dark gray carpet. In her 2 years as a flight attendant for Delta Airlines, she had faced many dilemmas, but none had her heart racing and conflicting as this morning. On one side was the responsibility to maintain order, to make sure the passengers were comfortable. On the other was something deeper, a sense of wrongness that she couldn't ignore. Leah looked toward row 2A. Ava Coleman was still sitting, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the window. From Leah's perspective, Ava was more than just a passenger. There was something about the woman that held her in place, a calmness, an air of someone accustomed to enduring injustice with dignity. Leah knew nothing about Ava beyond the name Ms. Ava L. Coleman printed on her ticket, but she sensed that this was someone who had weathered many storms in her life. In the row ahead, Gregory Mills was on the phone, his voice undimmed, seemingly intended for the whole cabin to hear. "Yeah, she's still sitting there. Can you believe it? They're delaying the flight for this nonsense. First class isn't what it used to be." His laugh rang out, dry and cold. Leah felt her stomach tighten. She wanted to go in and say he was wrong, that the way he talked about Ava was awful. But reason held her back. In Leah's head, the shift manager's voice from this morning still echoed. "Remember, passengers' comfort first. No arguments. Keep it professional at all times." The words repeated like an invisible command. She understood what the manager meant. Don't cause trouble. Don't let emotions get in the way. But looking at Ava, Leah wondered, does professionalism mean staying silent in the face of wrongdoing? Her shoulder radio clicked to life, and her colleague's voice came from the cockpit. "Captain Carter's here. He's on his way." Leah tightened her grip on the handle. She had called the captain, but now she wasn't sure if she had done the right thing. If Gregory was truly an influential frequent flyer, she could be in trouble after this flight. She could be reported for inflexibility, even suspended. But remembering Ava's look, Leah knew she couldn't do nothing. Captain Daniel Carter entered the cabin, his gait slow but steady. Leah felt a different air enter with him, calm, weighty, as if his very presence made the atmosphere less tense. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep. "I heard there's an issue." Leah nodded, quickly explaining. "Seat 2A belongs to Ms. Coleman, sir, but Mr. Mills insists it's his." Carter nodded slightly, unfazed. He walked toward the two. Gregory looked up, his voice still confident. "Captain, glad you're here. Maybe you can clear this up. I've been sitting in this seat for years." Carter looked at him, then at Ava. He said softly but clearly, "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" "Please." Gregory blinked, a little confused. "Oh, it's somewhere in my bag." He began rummaging through his pockets, then opened his briefcase. Ava said nothing, just sat still, her eyes calm as if she knew what was coming. Leah stood nearby, feeling the tension spread like an invisible current. Every passenger watched. No one said a word. Carter kept his voice steady. "Take your time, sir, but I'll need to confirm it before we depart." Gregory pulled out a piece of paper and placed it on the table. Carter glanced at it, then said firmly, "Your ticket says 3B. Sir." The cabin was dead silent. Leah could hear the slight breathing of a few passengers. Gregory sneered, trying to keep his composure. "There must be some mistake. I always sit here. This is my usual seat." Carter didn't take his eyes off him. "I understand. But today it belongs to Ms. Coleman. I'll have to ask you to move to 3B so we can get off." His voice was not high, not harsh, but it was so authoritative that no one could argue. However, Gregory still tried to maintain his position. "You're really going to take her side. I know people in your company. Captain, this could be a career mistake." Leah felt her heart clench. The words her side rang out clearly, carrying a meaning much deeper than a seat. Carter looked straight at him, his gaze unchanged. "I'm not taking sides. Sir, I'm following procedure." Gregory blushed, his lips pursed. "This is ridiculous." All this fuss over a seat, Carter tilted his head slightly. It's not just a seat when someone refuses to respect another passenger's rights. His words were slow but powerful. Leah stood still, her heart pounding. She knew everyone in the cabin heard the true message in his words. Ava looked at the captain, nodding slightly in silent thanks. Carter nodded in return, then turned to Leah. "Ms. Parker, please assist Mr. Mills to his correct seat." Leah stepped forward, her voice soft. "This way, sir." Gregory looked at her, his eyes irritated. "You'll hear about this later," he said, his voice low. Leah didn't reply, just kept a polite smile and pointed to row 3B. As he walked away, Leah saw Ava's shoulders relax a little. She approached and whispered, "Ms. Coleman, I'm sorry for everything that happened." Ava looked at her, smiling softly. "You have nothing to apologize for. You did what was right." Leah felt her throat tighten. In that moment, she understood what quiet courage was: not screaming, not getting angry, but standing still and keeping her dignity intact. Captain Carter turned to Ava. "Thank you for your patience, ma'am. We'll be departing soon." Ava nodded. "Thank you, Captain." He smiled. "You shouldn't have to thank me for doing what's right." Then he left, leaving the air as light as a storm that had just calmed. Leah stood alone in the middle of the cabin, still holding the notebook. She looked at Ava, then at the other passengers, then down at the words she had written on the first page. "Always keep calm and professional." Below that, she wrote a small sentence, "and human." As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Leah took a deep breath. She knew there was more to what had just happened. She didn't know who in the cabin had filmed it. She didn't know how the world would react. But deep down, she knew she had made the right choice. And whatever the consequences, she would not settle for silence. Ava tilted her head to look out the window. The light reflected off the glass, soft and dim. She didn't smile, just closed her eyes. In the silence of the engine, among the people who had just experienced an unexpected moment, something had changed, not just in the way people looked at her, but in the way they looked at each other. The plane took off, leaving behind a story that had just begun its journey beyond the confines of first class. And in Leah Parker's heart, for the first time, she understood that sometimes, Just a small action can make a big difference. After Captain Daniel Carter left the first-class cabin, a long silence fell over the entire space. Leah Parker stood at the counter, still looking at row 2A, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. Ava Coleman sat still, her hands resting lightly on her knees, her eyes looking out the window. She didn't seem angry or gloating, just calm enough to make everyone look at themselves. Meanwhile, Gregory Mills in row 3B was still muttering. His voice was low, but loud enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. Unbelievable. Such drama over a seat. That sentence made the already tense atmosphere even more dense. Ava didn't turn around, but she heard every word. She wondered how many times in her life she had to endure that kind of insult. Not with physical violence, but with seemingly harmless but malicious words. She didn't want to react. She knew if she did, people would see her as the one who started the trouble. So she stayed silent. But silence doesn't mean acceptance. Sometimes silence is the loudest statement. Leah stepped forward and asked softly, "Would you like some water, Ms.?" Coleman Ava turned around, her smile thin as a thread. "Thank you. Leah, that would be nice." Leah nodded, poured a glass of water, and placed it on the small table. Her hand shook slightly as she handed the glass to Ava, not out of fear, but out of a surge of emotion. She felt like she had just witnessed something beyond the everyday something about truth and courage. A male passenger in the row in front of him whispered to his companion. She handled it better than anyone could. The other nodded, whispering back, "Yeah." The guy in 3B embarrassed himself. Ava's words reached her ears. She didn't turn around, but her lips curved up a little. Not a triumphant smile, but a relief, the feeling that she wasn't completely alone. Gregory remained seated, arms folded, his gaze fixed straight ahead as if to show he was unconcerned. But Leah could tell from the way he flipped through his magazine, his movements stiff, that something inside him was wavering. Perhaps for the first time, he felt exposed to the judgmental gaze of others. Captain Carter returned to the cockpit. He spoke briefly over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly." His voice was deep and steady, reassuring. Leah checked the list, fastening the seatbelts of the passengers near the door. When she turned back, she saw Ava still looking out, where the morning sunlight was reflecting off the wings of the plane. She seemed to be in another world, quiet, isolated from all the noise. A silent dialogue was going on inside Ava. She thought about the time she had to suppress her anger to maintain her position, about the meetings where her voice was cut off mid-sentence, about the articles about her that read first black female CEO. They meant it as a compliment, but to Ava it was a reminder that she was still viewed differently. Now, on this plane, she was facing another test of prejudice, just in a different context, more subtle, more public. The plane began to taxi down the runway, the soft hum of the engines mixed with the screeching of metal, making the cabin vibrate slightly. Leah sat down in the steward's seat and fastened her seatbelt, but her mind was restless. She looked at Ava, then at Gregory. Two people, two different worlds, sitting on the same plane. One had won with composure. The other had lost with his arrogance. Suddenly, Ava heard the sound of a phone clicking behind her. She turned around. A young passenger was holding a phone, trying to record a video. Leah saw this and stepped forward. "Sir, please turn that off. Filming is not allowed during takeoff." The young man blushed and quickly turned it off. But clearly, the video had captured a few seconds of the confrontation. Ava thought about it for a moment, then sighed softly. She knew that a story like this, if leaked, would spread very quickly. But right now, she just wanted the flight to end peacefully. As the plane picked up speed, the lights outside the window flared. Ava closed her eyes, the pressure of the plane leaving the ground making her sway slightly. It was also the moment she felt a surge of fatigue, not just from the trip, but from all the times in her life she had faced doubt, looks, and words like that. She didn't cry, but something inside her quietly melted. Gregory opened his mouth, his voice lower but still audible. She thinks she won something. People these days are too sensitive. Ava didn't turn around, but Leah stood nearby, listening to every word. She bit her lip, holding back her emotions. She understood that some people would never admit their mistakes, but she also knew that the truth didn't need anyone to acknowledge it. It existed on its own weight. As the plane steadied, Leah began serving breakfast. She brought trays to each seat, smiling at the passengers. When she reached row 2A, she asked softly, "Coffee or tea?" "Ms. Coleman." Ava opened her eyes, her voice soft as a breath. "Just coffee, please. Black." Leah nodded, brought the coffee cup, and set it down on the table. "Thank you for your patience earlier," she whispered. Ava looked at her, her eyes warm. "You did the right thing. Leah, don't ever doubt that." The words brought Leah to tears. Gregory accepted his food without a word of thanks. He just bent down, digging his fork into the cold egg, as if trying to swallow his anger. But outside, the sky was blue and peaceful, seemingly untouched by the chaos. Time passed slowly. Ava sipped her coffee, the bitter taste spreading in her mouth. She put down her cup and stared into space. She knew there would be consequences. Someone might record it. The press might find out. Gregory might try to cover it up. But Ava wasn't afraid. She was used to public opinion, to controversy. The only thing that bothered her was, would her actions make other women better off? Leah returned to the counter and sat down in the spare chair. She opened her notebook and jotted down a few words. "Today, I saw that the right thing doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be done." She closed the notebook and looked out. The fear in her heart had dissipated, leaving only a fragile belief that justice, however slow, could still exist. Ava stared silently out the window. The white clouds drifted slowly, reflecting the warm yellow sunlight. She felt as if she had been lifted away from the noise of the world. There was only her steady breathing and peaceful heartbeat. But deep down, she knew this flight wasn't over. It was just the beginning of another journey, one she never expected would make headlines. The next morning, the steady hum of the DL729 engines was like a distant soundtrack. Ava Coleman sat quietly, her eyes looking out the small window, where white clouds lay layered like giant cotton strips. The sunlight shone on her face, reflecting in her deep eyes, both strong and filled with an indescribable sadness. She took a sip of cold coffee, letting the bitter taste spread slowly, as a reminder that she was still awake. Inside the quiet, first-class cabin, everything seemed peaceful. But inside Ava, memories were rising like wave after wave. She recalled her first day at Novaterra Technologies, the company she founded more than 15 years ago. Novaterra was a small team working out of an old garage in Oakland. The long sleepless nights, the days of cold calling dozens of investors for funding, and the hundreds of rejections. Many told her that a black woman couldn't lead a tech company, that it was a world reserved for other men. She remembered someone telling her bluntly, "You're smart, but we need a face that inspires trust." Ava was quiet, but inside her was a stubborn fire if trust was the color of skin. She would let the results color prejudice. 10 years later, Novaterra is one of the leaders in clean energy technology. Ava has appeared on the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and many other major newspapers. But with that glory comes a lot of pressure. She can't afford to make a mistake. Can't give anyone the excuse that it's because she's a black woman. Every move she makes must be precise. Every word must be measured. People call her an icon, an inspiration, but sometimes she just wants to be human, allowed to be tired and make mistakes without being judged twice. Beside her, the coffee cup vibrated gently to the rhythm of the engine. Leah Parker walked by, glanced at Ava, saw her eyes slightly closed, thought she was asleep. But in fact, Ava was looking back on the journey. She remembered her mother, Mrs. Rosa Coleman, the woman who worked 2 jobs at the same time just to have enough money to send her daughter to college. Every morning, her mother got up at 4, worked the first shift at the hospital, and in the afternoon she went to clean rooms at a small hotel. Her mother used to say, "You may not be rich, you may not be powerful, but you must keep your self-respect, because that is the only thing that no one can take away." Ava still remembered the evening when she was 16, when her teacher called her out of class just because she thought the essay she submitted couldn't have written by yourself. She came home in tears, and her mother just looked at her for a long time and said, "Don't prove it with words, prove it with your actions." That was the guiding principle for Ava throughout her life. Now, sitting in first class, facing a man who looked down on her out of prejudice, Ava felt like fate was testing her again to see if, after all these years, she could still keep her composure and keep her mother's words. The cabin was so quiet, she could hear the drip of water in the coffee pot. No one spoke. Leah was serving in the back, and Gregory Mills was still glued to his phone, occasionally muttering something unpleasant under his breath. Ava opened her bag and took out a small notebook. Inside was the speech she had prepared for an upcoming conference in New York. The title, italicized, read "Compassion as Leadership." She reread a few paragraphs and smiled slightly. In the business world, power is not about who speaks louder, but who listens deeper. She had written this sentence after a tense meeting, when an employee had been insulted by a partner but still chose to remain silent. She had wondered, was silence a sign of weakness or strength? Today, she understood. Silence was not about avoiding, but about keeping herself from becoming like the person who had insulted her. Outside the window, the clouds were breaking into long strips, and the midday sun reflected off the plane's wings, shining like a giant mirror. Ava saw her reflection, a little tired, but still determined. She whispered softly, as if talking to herself, "Mom, I won't lose my temper. I've learned." Suddenly, she remembered the meeting 3 years ago, when a major shareholder withdrew their investment because they didn't believe in someone like her ability to lead. They said it to her face, without hesitation. After the meeting, Ava sat alone in her dark office, looking out at the city lights. She cried not because she was hurt, but because she was tired. Tired of always being strong, always proving herself. But then, just a few hours later, she wiped her tears, called her executive team, and said firmly, "We don't need anyone to believe in us. We just need to do the right thing." That sentence saved Novaterra from the crisis, back in the present. Ava gently closed the book and leaned her head back against the seat. A strange feeling rose in her heart, both peaceful and heavy. She knew this flight was more than just the journey from Atlanta to New York. It was a symbol of her entire life, the journey from being told she shouldn't be here to being able to sit still where she deserved to be. Leah stepped closer and asked softly, "Miss Coleman, would you like more coffee?" Ava opened her eyes and smiled. "No, thank you." Leah nodded, her eyes seeming to want to say something, but then stopped. Ava understood. The girl was learning to be brave, just like she had learned years ago. She leaned over to look at the back seat, where Gregory remained silent. His smug expression had faded, replaced by confusion and suppressed anger. She didn't hate him. In fact, she pitied him, because people like him, no matter how powerful or wealthy, were still bound by fear. Fear of losing their status, of being seen as equals. She understood that sometimes the prejudiced were victims of that same fear. Ava took a deep breath, letting the cool air of the plane fill her lungs. She felt lighter. "I will not let someone's anger make me forget compassion," she whispered. As she said it, she realized tears were threatening to fall, but this time it was because she felt free. Free from the obsession to prove something. Free from the invisible constraints that society had placed on her for so long. Leah walked past, paused, then smiled at her. Ava returned the warm look. In that moment, two women, different skin colors, different backgrounds, seemed to understand each other without words. In a place suspended between heaven and earth, between strangers, a silent connection was formed. Ava closed her eyes. She knew that when the plane landed, the world below would still be noisy with old prejudices, but at least she knew she still had enough faith not to become like them. Ava Coleman opened her eyes after a fitful sleep. She didn't know how long she had been asleep, but when she woke up, the first-class cabin was still bathed in soft light. Leah Parker was quietly clearing away the tray tables, her steps so light that she barely made a sound. The steady hum of the engine and the soft flipping of papers from a few passengers were interspersed, creating an uncomfortable silence. It felt like everyone was trying to pretend nothing had happened, but no one had truly forgotten what had happened. Ava looked out. The clouds rolled like soft waves beneath the plane, but inside her, another wave was rising, a wave of hurt, of exhaustion, of unanswered questions. How many times in her life had she held back like this? How many times had she swallowed insults, knowing that if she reacted, people would say she was too sensitive, too strong, too black? She stretched and took a deep breath. The cold air from the air conditioning made her chest ache. Ava felt caught between two extremes, between wanting to say everything and knowing that silence might be the only option to preserve her dignity. She wasn't afraid of confrontation, but she was afraid that if she revealed too much, people would only remember her anger and not see the real her. The clink of a glass on the table startled her. Leah had returned, placing a glass of orange juice in front of her. "I thought you might want something fresh," the girl whispered. Ava looked at the glass and nodded. "Thank you, Leah." She picked up the glass, watching the golden liquid reflect the light outside. For a moment, she realized her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from holding back all the things she wanted to say, but couldn't. Gregory Mills remained in the back seat, uncharacteristically quiet. He had lost his composure since the captain had left. Every now and then, Ava would hear him sigh or tap his fingers on the table. Maybe he was regretful, or maybe he was just calculating how to tell the story in his favor. Leah looked around, then approached Ava, lowering her voice. "Ms. Coleman, I just want to say, what you did this morning was remarkable. I've never seen anyone so calm." Ava turned, her eyes soft. "Thank you, Leah, but sometimes staying calm isn't a choice. It's a habit you develop when you don't have the right to be angry." Leah froze, at a loss for words. For a moment, she felt the weight of the years this woman had carried on her shoulders. Ava put down her glass of water and turned back to her chair. She saw Gregory sneaking a glance at her. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away. The light from the window illuminated Ava's face, giving her eyes an unusually strong look. She didn't hate Gregory, but she also didn't want to forgive him for what he did, as if it were just a little misunderstanding. An old memory flashed through Ava's mind. It was when she was 30, in a large investment committee meeting. When she entered the room, the man at the head of the table asked, "Are you here for coffee or to give a presentation?" The room erupted in laughter. Ava walked to her chair, opened her laptop, and said calmly, "Both, sir. But first, I'll present a strategy to help your company increase revenue by 40%. She remembered the look in his eyes when the meeting ended, a look of surprise and shame. From that day on, she understood that to survive in this world, sometimes one must turn wounds into armor. The plane lurched slightly, and an announcement came on the intercom. Captain Carter's voice, deep and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're entering a mild turbulence zone. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." Leah quickly checked the passengers' seatbelts. Ava fastened hers and looked out the window. The clouds thickened, the lights streaking like silver streaks. She felt like she was walking through a small storm, but in reality, the larger storm was inside her. She thought about the speech she was about to give. The words from her prepared notes flashed through her mind. "We don't have to shout to be heard, but we have to be brave enough not to be silent forever." Could this flight be her chance to practice what she was about to say to hundreds of people in New York? As the plane rocked harder, some passengers clutched the armrest. Gregory did the same. Leah walked by, holding on to her seat lightly for balance. For a brief moment, her eyes met Ava's. They didn't speak, but they both knew that sometimes the turbulence on the outside made one feel more secure on the inside. After a while, the plane stabilized. The intercom sounded again. "We're clear of turbulence. Thank you for your patience." Ava exhaled, her hand still on her seatbelt. She looked around, then bent down to take a small photo from her pocket, a photo of her and her mother on the opening day of Novaterra's new headquarters. She stared at the photo, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. If her mother were still alive, she would be proud. But perhaps she would also be sad to see that the world had not changed as much as she had hoped. Leah walked past again, her eyes catching the photo in Ava's hand. "That's your mother," Ava nodded. "Yes, she was the strongest woman I've ever known," Leah smiled. "I think you've inherited that strength." Ava was silent for a few seconds, then said softly, "Strength isn't about fighting, Leah. It's about choosing when not to." The words seemed to fall into the air, lingering in the air, leaving Leah standing still for a moment. The wave inside Ava slowly subsided, but it didn't disappear. It was just waiting for the right moment to break, when she no longer had to hold herself back. She knew that once this plane landed, it wouldn't stop. Videos, stories, public opinion, they would all come to her. But right now, in the middle of this sky, Ava just wanted to allow herself to be vulnerable for a few minutes. She leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw herself at every moment, the young girl who was ignored, the woman who had to fight to be heard, and the woman today, sitting still in the sky, holding back the storm in her heart. A single tear fell, light as dew, but containing the long journey of a lifetime in search of justice. The familiar ding sound rang out as the plane reached a stable altitude, signaling that passengers could use electronic devices. Ava Coleman opened her phone, intending to check some work emails. Little did she know that, in just a few dozen minutes, the world outside had changed. A young passenger sitting in the back seat, who had tried to take a short video of Gregory Mills and Ava arguing, had posted the clip on social media. Within 10 minutes, it had gone viral. The headline read, "Black Woman CEO's Seat Hijacked by White Man. Pilot Shuts Him Down." Ava was checking her meeting schedule when her phone started vibrating. Text messages, emails, and a slew of social media notifications were coming in. She frowned and tapped on one from her assistant, Ava. "Your video's going viral on Twitter. Are you okay?" She froze for a few seconds, her heart racing. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from shock. She hadn't said anything, hadn't done anything wrong, and yet millions of people were now looking at her through the lens of an event she had no intention of creating. Leah Parker walked over and saw Ava's face change. "Everything all right?" "Ms. Coleman." Ava nodded slightly, then held out her phone for her to see. Leah bent down and read the video title. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, they recorded it." Ava said nothing, just sighed. It was bound to happen. "I guess." Leah fumbled. "But this could go anywhere. People might twist it." Ava looked at her voice strangely calm. "People always do. What matters is how we respond." In the back seat, Gregory Mills also realized something was wrong. He flipped open his phone, his face turning pale. When he saw himself in the video, his yelling at Ava, the moment Captain Carter stepped forward to tell him to leave, he froze. The laughter, the smirk, the "do you know who I am" were clear. He turned the video off, sweat beading on his forehead. He knew he was the center of attention, but not in the way he wanted. Leah glanced back and saw Gregory frantically typing on his phone. He was probably trying to contact someone, a lawyer, or the media. The atmosphere in the cabin became heavy again. Ava sat still, her heart churning. She didn't want to be a symbol of a discrimination war. She just wanted a peaceful flight. But fate has a way of throwing people into the eye of a storm when they're just trying to find some peace. "Do you want me to tell Captain Carter?" Leah asked softly. Ava shook her head. "No need. Leah, neither of us did anything wrong." That statement made Leah feel strangely secure. Even though there was a raging storm outside, the woman before her was as calm as a lake in the morning. A moment later, the cabin speaker came on. Captain Carter's voice echoed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be experiencing some light traffic near New York, so we might arrive a few minutes later than scheduled." Ava looked out, saw the sky gradually turning pale yellow, the sunlight slanting slightly. She knew that soon, when the plane landed, she would have to face a whole new world talking about her. She opened Twitter and saw the first comment. She handled it with such grace. The second, "That man deserves to be banned from flying." Then thousands more, shares, debates, comments. Some called her an unsung heroine. Another, "Don't make it a race issue." She read with a heavy heart. She didn't want to be a symbol, but others were making her the center of a much larger conversation. Gregory looked at his phone screen and saw his name plastered across the posts. An anonymous account had identified him as the CFO of Argon Systems. The post began to spread like wildfire. Man in viral plane video identified as executive of Argon Systems. Angry comments, calls for a boycott of the company. He felt like he was being publicly stripped naked, a feeling both humiliating and terrifying. He gasped for breath, his hands shaking as he tried to call his communications manager, but the signal was too weak. Leah looked at him, saw the paleness of his face. She saw the panic in his eyes. For a moment, she felt pity, but then she remembered what he had said, the way he had looked at Ava, and the pity turned to emptiness. Ava put the phone down on the table and leaned back in her chair. A series of images flashed through her mind. Her mother, the office in California, the young employees who trusted her, tense meetings where she had to keep her cool under provocation. She knew her life had been about being watched, judged. But today, the difference was that she wasn't just being watched. She was being filmed. She wondered if this was an opportunity or tragedy. Could this spread spark a larger conversation about respect? Or was it just another wave in an ocean of forgotten news? She didn't know. But deep down, she knew one thing: she had no regrets. Leah turned back to her and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Ava turned, her voice soft as a breath. "I don't know yet. Leah, maybe I will be. Maybe this is something I was meant to face." Leah nodded. "Whatever happens, people saw the truth." Ava smiled. "Yes, and the truth is never easy." As the plane began to descend, the announcement of landing came over the loudspeaker. The lights outside brightened. Ava looked out the window, seeing the buildings of New York in the distance. Fading into a thin mist, the city below was moving, and soon it would know about this flight. She took a deep breath and gripped the armrest. Gregory sat in the back, eyes closed. He knew that when he stepped off the plane, he would not be the same person. He could lose his job, his reputation, even his career. But perhaps, in some corner of his mind, he knew he had been wrong. The plane touched down, shaking slightly. A round of applause rang out, as passengers always do after a safe landing. Leah smiled slightly, but her eyes followed Ava. She knew the real storm was just beginning. Ava stood up and grabbed her luggage. She smiled at Leah. "Thank you for your kindness," Leah replied. "Take care. Miss Coleman." As she stepped out of the cabin, a few passengers nodded slightly, their eyes different, respectful. Ava headed for the exit, her phone still vibrating in her hand. Part of her wanted to turn it off, to disappear for a few days. But the other part knew that this was the moment she had to show up, not to make excuses, but to say something. In the airport corridor, she paused for a moment, looking around at the bustling crowd. In the mirror, she saw herself still Ava Coleman, but different, calmer, more prepared. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew the most important thing was to keep her heart in the midst of the noise. And somewhere deep inside, she heard her mother's voice softly say, "You did the right thing." Ava Coleman left JFK Airport, her breath mingling with the cold November air of New York. She pulled her small suitcase, stepping past the taxi queue, car horns, newspaper vendors' cries, distant subway speakers, all blended into the familiar sounds of the city that never sleeps. But today, everything sounded faint in Ava's ears, as her mind began to grasp the true scale of the storm she was about to face. The phone in her pocket buzzed incessantly. When she looked at the screen, A series of messages appeared from assistants, from friends, from reporters. Ava, your video is trending on Twitter. CNN wants to interview you. Fox News is covering the incident. Are you okay? She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but her palms were starting to sweat. She had never sought the media spotlight, and now, with it focused on her, she felt nothing but exhaustion. When the taxi stopped in front of the hotel where she was staying, Ava saw a few people standing around taking pictures. A young woman approached, holding up her phone. Ms. Coleman, we support you. You're amazing. Ava smiled slightly, nodded her thanks, and quickly walked into the lobby. She didn't want to appear cold, but she knew that anything she said now could be quoted and interpreted differently. Her hotel room was on the 17th floor, overlooking Central Park. As soon as the door closed, Ava sank down on the sofa, her eyes closed. She kicked off her shoes, stretched, and took a deep breath. She turned on her phone and saw that her media emails were full. A headline from the New York Times stood out: Black female CEO humiliated on flight. Passengers call out discrimination. Below that, another from an opposition news site: overreaction or misunderstanding. Viral plane video divides internet. She didn't know whether to laugh or to feel sad. Everyone was arguing about it, but no one asked her how she felt. Ava stared at the message, then put her phone down on the table. Her mother's words echoed in her head. When people talk about you, let your actions speak for themselves. But in this world, where things spread in seconds, can actions still keep up with words? The phone rang again. This time it was Marcus Lee, an old friend and co-founder of Novaterra. Ava, are you okay? His voice was warm, a little worried. I just saw the video. It was terrible. But everyone is on your side. The media is rushing to find out. Ava replied slowly. I don't want to be famous for this. Marcus, I just want peace. Marcus chuckled softly into the phone. You know, peace doesn't exist on social media. But maybe this is your chance to say something bigger. Ava was silent. She understood Marcus. He always believed that everything could be an opportunity to change social perceptions. But she was tired. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to be a woman who had her seat taken. Then given back, it was that simple. While Ava struggled to regain her composure, across town, Gregory Mills was in crisis. In the Argonne Systems office, the communications team was in an emergency meeting. The big screen flashed a series of posts: Argonne CFO humiliates black woman on Delta flight. Boycott Argonne trending. A female PR person spoke quickly. We're losing clients. 3 partners have already called to cancel. Gregory sat there, head bowed, sweat running down his temples. It wasn't like that, he muttered. It wasn't what people think. But no one listened to him. Everyone in the room looked cold. The CEO looked straight at him, his voice firm. Gregory, you need to step down for now. This company cannot afford your mistakes. Gregory looked up, intending to respond, but he couldn't speak. Any excuses were meaningless before the power of the image. The video was only 2 minutes long, but it had shattered his career of 20 years. He knew that in this world, people didn't need the whole truth. They just needed a story to tell. In her hotel room, Ava sat in front of her computer screen, reading each comment. Some said she was inspiring. Others questioned her motives. She planned this for attention. Maybe she was rude first. She smiled sadly. These people didn't know her, didn't know what had really happened, but they were still ready to judge. Still, amid the endless chatter, One comment made her pause. An account named Young Girl. Reaming wrote, "Watching her gave me courage to walk into my first job interview tomorrow. Thank you, Ms. Coleman." Ava read the words over and over again, and a tear fell from her eye. She touched the screen, as if she could touch the girl on the other side. That afternoon, Leah Parker sat in the airline lounge, checking her phone for news. When she saw Ava's picture splashed across the pages, she felt both proud and nervous. She remembered Ava's eyes as she got off the plane, calm, strong, but also filled with sadness. Leah texted, "Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. You showed me what quiet strength looks like." Ava replied a few minutes later, "Thank you, Leah. You reminded me that kindness still exists." Night had fallen, and the city lights reflected off the ceiling. Ava stood by the window, watching the cars pass by. The New York skyline was different today. She opened her laptop and began typing. Not an excuse, but a letter. I don't want the incident on the flight to be a story of division. I want it to be a reminder that, even in the smallest moments, respect is something people should show each other. She paused, rereading each sentence, then hit post. Within minutes, the article went viral. People shared, commented, and supported. Major newspapers began to update Ava Coleman Speaks Up, a message of dignity and grace. She smiled slightly. She knew the storm was not over yet, but at least she had chosen to face it with calm, not anger. Gregory, on the other hand, saw the post. He read it slowly, and for the first time in years, he felt truly ashamed, not because he had been caught, but because he realized he had become an example of the worst thing in humanity, unwarranted arrogance. He turned off his computer, sat quietly in his dark room, and felt a terrifying emptiness. That night, in 2 different rooms in the same city, 2 people who had been on the same flight were both sleepless. One was becoming a symbol of perseverance, the other a testament to the consequences of disrespect. But they had one thing in common. They were both facing themselves. The next morning, the early morning sun streamed through the large glass windows, glinting off the black coffee Ava Coleman held. She sat at the corner table by the window, still wearing her simple gray pajamas, her hair tied back. She had only slept 2 hours the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind raced with thousands of messages, articles, and missed calls. At some point, she opened her laptop and read them all, as if understanding the storm would calm her. But the more she read, the more tired she felt. Praise mixed with attacks. People calling her an icon mixed with those saying she was exploiting the story for fame. The world out there both celebrated and dissected her in the same breath. The phone rang again. It was Marcus Lee. "Ava, CNN wants to do an exclusive interview with you. They said if you agree, it will be the opening story of tonight's news." Ava was silent for a few seconds. "Do you think I should do it?" Marcus replied. "If you don't say it, someone else will say it for you. You've always believed that the truth should be told in your own voice." Ava nodded slightly, her eyes looking out at Central Park. "I'm just afraid that once I speak, people will hear what they want to hear, not what I have to say." Marcus chuckled. "They can edit your words, but they can't change the way you speak. You are Ava Coleman, the one who, when you're quiet, makes people listen." Ava looked at the picture of her mother on the table. In the morning light, Rose's face seemed to look at her, soft and calm. She knew her mother wouldn't tell her to hide. Tell your story your way, she would say, not to be mean, but to remind people of what's right. She smiled slightly. Okay, Marcus, make the appointment. The interview was scheduled for that afternoon. When the CNN camera crew arrived, Ava was ready, wearing a simple black suit and only small pearl earrings. She didn't want her appearance to overshadow the most important thing, the message. The reporter's name was Diane Moore, a middle-aged white woman known for her insightful interviews. Diane began softly. "Thank you, Ms. Coleman, for agreeing to meet with us. I know this isn't an easy time," Ava replied with a thin smile. "There's never an easy time for the truth. But I think it's time to tell it." Lights filled the room. Diane asked, "How did it feel when that video went viral and the whole world knew your name?" Ava was silent for a few seconds before answering. "Actually, the first thing I felt was tired, because I knew that millions of people would look at me and see what they wanted to believe: a strong woman, an icon, or a victim. But I'm just a normal woman, used to having to stay calm in situations where other people are allowed to be angry." Diane nodded, looking directly at Ava. "Do you think it's about race?" The question silenced the room. Ava took a deep breath. "I think it's not just about race. It's about the familiarity of power. When someone is used to being given priority, they often don't notice it until they have to give way. And when a black woman sits in what they think is their seat, they feel uncomfortable not because of the chair, but because of what the chair projects." The answer left Diane silent for a moment. She nodded slightly, then asked, "If you could say anything to that man, what would you say?" Ava looked down at her hand, her thumb twisting the thin silver ring. "I would say I forgive him, but I don't forget. Forgiveness isn't about letting go. It's about letting yourself get caught up in anger. I hope he'll think back, not just about what he did, but about what made him believe he had the right to do it." The camera crew fell silent. Diane smiled, her voice warming. "Thank you, Ava. Your story might make a lot of people look at themselves," Ava replied softly. "I just hope so." When the interview ended, Diane stepped forward and shook Ava's hand. "You spoke with a calmness that few people can muster in a situation like this. I think the audience will sense that." Ava smiled, returned the thanks, and waved the group away. As the door closed behind her, she sat down, feeling relieved, but also a little nervous. She knew that in a few hours, the world would hear her voice, and she had no control over what would happen next. That evening, as the news was broadcast on TV screens across America, Ava appeared in the frame, her eyes bright, her voice calm, her words clear and sincere. Millions of people watched. Millions of comments appeared. Many wrote, "She spoke with such grace. That's leadership." But there were also those who tried to deflect. "She's just playing the victim." Ava sat on her bed, watching the comments roll in. But this time, she didn't feel scared. She knew she had done the right thing, and the right thing didn't need everyone's approval. It just needed to be said. Gregory Mills was watching the same show in a small apartment in Virginia. He sat alone in the dark, the TV screen casting a dim light on his tired face. When Ava said, "Forgiveness is not forgetting," he felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in years, he felt small. He turned off the TV, stood up, and looked out the window. Outside, the sky was gray and the wind was strong. He knew he had to do something, not to save his image, but to apologize. In New York, Leah Parker sat in her cubicle, watching the news on her phone. She smiled proudly. She remembered Ava telling her on the plane, "You did the right thing." Now she understood. Ava was doing the right thing too, not with accusations, but with kindness. Leah opened Instagram and wrote a short note I saw true courage. She not only reclaimed her seat, but also our dignity. As night fell, Ava turned off the TV and got up to open the window. The night air rushed in, cool and peaceful, down on the street. The headlights of cars stretched out like a river of light. She felt lighter than ever. She knew it wasn't over. Tomorrow there might be critics. Tomorrow there might be supporters. But in this moment, she felt at peace. She had said what needed to be said, and that was the only thing that really mattered. She poured another cup of tea, sat down at the table, opened her notebook, and wrote a single sentence. True strength lies not in how we fight, but in choosing compassion when the world demands anger. She put down her pen and smiled. Outside, the city was still noisy, but inside the small room, Ava Coleman had found her own quiet again. 3 days after the interview, Ava Coleman was still front and center. Excerpts of her speech were shared millions of times, especially the line, "When people are used to being given priority, they perceive fairness as threatening." It was echoed in forums, printed on posters at a social justice lecture, even quoted in a college classroom. Ava didn't intend to become an icon, but the world chose her to be one. That morning, Ava sat in the small cafe in Soho, where she often went when she needed to think. Outside, New York bustled with hurried footsteps, honking cars, and the smell of baked goods wafting through the air. She wore a dark felt hat and sunglasses to avoid recognition, but a few people still pointed. A young woman approached, speaking softly and with emotion in her voice. "Ms. Coleman, thank you for what you said. I work in an environment where I have to prove myself every day. When you said that, I felt like I was no longer alone." Ava smiled, put her hand on the girl's shoulder, and whispered, "Keep going. Don't let anyone make you believe you have to shrink to be accepted." The girl, tears in her eyes, bowed her head in thanks and left. Ava watched, an indescribable feeling rising in her heart. She didn't want to be a hero, but she realized that sometimes just a true story can touch the hearts of thousands of people. However, behind the praise, there were still waves of opposition smoldering. Some conservative TV channels said she was inciting racial issues. One online newspaper even headlined Ava Coleman, victim or wavemaker. She did not react, nor did she give further interviews. Instead, she chose to remain silent, because she understood that the truth does not need to be protected by words, but by time. That afternoon, as Ava left the bar, it began to rain lightly. Drops of water fell, fogging the glass. She opened her umbrella, about to turn onto the street leading to the hotel, when she heard someone call her name. "Ms. Coleman." The man's voice trembled slightly. She turned, and in that moment, her heart stopped. Standing a few feet away was Gregory Mills. He looked different than he had on the plane. His once elegant suit was gone, replaced by a simple brown coat. His hair was silver. His face was gaunt, his eyes heavy. He walked slowly toward her, his hands clasped. Ava stood still, unsure how to react. "I apologize for disturbing you," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "I just want to talk. If you'll excuse me." The rain was falling harder. Ava looked around, saw a nearby cafe, and nodded. "We can go inside." They sat down at a table by the window, in the quiet atmosphere of the cafe. The sound of the rain outside was like a curtain. Keeping a bit of privacy for the conversation Ava never thought would happen, Gregory began, his eyes not daring to meet hers. I don't know where to begin. 2 words. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was so complacent, so used to being given priority that I didn't even notice. When I saw you sitting there, my first reaction wasn't to check your ticket, but to feel offended, and that was the biggest mistake. He paused, swallowed, his voice growing hoarse. When the video went viral, I was furious. I blamed the cameraman, the media, and you. But when I watched your interview, I realized you weren't condemning me. You were just talking about respect. And that's what makes me ashamed. Ava was silent. Outside, the rain pounded against the windows in sheets. She looked at the man before her. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the cool confidence. Just a man suffering the consequences of his actions. Did you lose your job? She asked softly. Gregory nodded. They put me on indefinite leave. I understand. I was too much trouble. But what weighed on me the most was not losing my job, but realizing I was setting a bad example for my son. He watched the video and asked, Dad, why did you do that to her? I had no answer. Ava bowed her head, her hands clenching. Part of her wanted to sympathize, but the other part still hurt. I can't change what happened, she said slowly, but I believe everyone can learn from their mistakes. Gregory looked up, his eyes glistening with tears. Can you forgive me? In that moment, Ava felt her heart sink. She thought of her mother, of her teachings of compassion, of Leah, of the people who had sent her messages thanking her. She also thought of the thousands of other black women who had been wronged, and no one had apologized to them. Forgiveness, she understood, was not forgetting, but giving herself a way to move on. She looked at Gregory, her voice soft as mist. I forgive you. Not for you, but because I don't want to carry this anger anymore. Gregory nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks. He held out his hand, hesitant. Ava looked at it for a few seconds, then reached up to take it. The handshake was short, but it held a long journey of realization and redemption. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Outside, the rain had stopped. The faint light of late afternoon shone on the glass, reflecting the 2 once enemies now sitting together at the table, in a strange silence that only tolerance could create. As Gregory stood up, he said, I'm going to be out of town for a while, but I want to do something to make things right. If you'll allow me, I'd like to donate to the Nova Terra Scholarship Fund, which helps students of color study technology. Ava looked a little surprised, then nodded. If that's what you really want, I'd appreciate it. As he left, Ava watched his figure fade down the street. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders, so much so that it made her smile. She knew this encounter wouldn't erase everything that had happened, but it would reveal something more important, a change in a person. And sometimes, just one person changing is the start of a wave. On the way back to the hotel, Ava looked up at the sky, which had cleared after the rain. The lights reflected off the wet pavement like thousands of tiny stars. She pulled out her phone and opened the message from Leah, who had texted her that morning. How's it going? Ms. Coleman. Ava smiled and typed back, a new chapter begins. That evening, Ava wrote in her notebook, forgiveness does not erase the past, but it opens up the future. She put down her pen, closed her eyes, and felt more peaceful than ever. A week had passed since Ava Coleman and Gregory Mills met, and New York City was entering the late autumn days. The sky was clearer, and the leaves were starting to change color. Ava returned to work at Novaterra Technologies. The glass high-rise reflected the warm yellow sunlight, and she walked in feeling a little different, lighter, calmer, and a little more thoughtful. Employees greeted her with friendly smiles, some with slight nods, their eyes showing admiration. The incident on the flight seemed to have changed her image, not only in the public eye, but also within the company. In the morning, Ava walked into the large conference room where the executive team was waiting. Marcus Lee was already standing by the board, smiling at her. "Welcome back. Ava, the whole office missed you." She smiled softly. "I missed you too. Now, let's get back to work." The air in the room warmed. Small laughter echoed between familiar faces. But everyone noticed that something about Ava had changed. She was still the strong leader she had always been. But in her voice and eyes, there was a calmness of someone who had gone through a major event. The meeting went smoothly. Toward the end, Marcus made a suggestion. "I think we should expand our corporate scholarship program for students of color, as Gregory Mills suggested. He just made a significant donation to the fund. I think we should call it the Second Chance Fund." The room was silent for a few seconds. Ava looked at Marcus, then nodded slightly. "That's a great name. It reminds us that change is real, and everyone deserves a second chance." At noon, Ava went for a walk around the park near the company. She brought a cup of hot coffee with her, breathing in the cold, early winter air as she walked. The sound of dry leaves rustling under her feet, the sound of sparrows chirping on the bare branches made her feel at peace. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was Leah Parker. Ava smiled and answered, "Hello, Leah." On the other end of the line, Leah's voice rang out excitedly. "I just got promoted. Ms. Coleman, I'll be the head flight attendant on the New York-Atlanta route. I want to thank you. I really do. Without that story, I wouldn't have had the courage to believe that I deserved this opportunity." Ava stopped, looking up at the clear blue sky. "Congratulations, Leah. You made it this far on your own. Just remember one thing. When you have the power to choose, use it to do what's right." Leah smiled into the phone. "I will." When the call ended, Ava felt her heart warm. Life is strange, she thought. One small act, one seemingly unjust moment, can change the course of so many people. That afternoon, Ava went to Columbia University to speak at the invitation of the economics department. The auditorium was packed. In the front row were young students, many of them black women, their eyes filled with hope. As she stepped up to the podium, Ava paused for a few seconds, scanned the room, and then spoke softly but clearly. "My story didn't begin on that plane. It began many years ago, when I was a little girl who had to prove that she was good enough to be heard. And it probably won't end there, because justice isn't a destination, it's a journey." The hall fell silent, all eyes on her. She told the story not as a tragedy, but as a lesson, about staying calm in the face of injustice, about choosing forgiveness over hate. When she got to the reunion with Gregory and the handshake in the rain-soaked cafe, many in the audience fell silent. One student stood up and asked, "How could you forgive him so easily?" Ava smiled. "It's not easy, but anger only burdens us. Forgiveness is not because others deserve it, but because we deserve peace." After the talk, students rushed up to take pictures and ask for autographs. A young girl held Ava's hand, her eyes filled with tears. "You make me believe that I can be someone." Ava looked at her and said softly, "I don't need to be anyone but myself." The girl nodded, smiling through her tears. When Ava returned to the hotel that evening, she stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself. She saw a woman who had endured unexpected trials, but instead of letting them break her, she had turned them into strength. The light reflected off her eyes, shining with a clear light of faith. She remembered what her mother had said. You can't change the way people see you, but you can choose how you reflect that look. She smiled. At that moment, her phone lit up. It was an email from Gregory Mills. The subject line was simple: "Thank you." Ava opened it, only to find a few short lines. "I attended a diversity conference today. I listened to people I had never heard before. I realized that the world is not lacking in talented people, but in those who are willing to look beyond their own prejudices. Thank you for making me see that." Ava finished reading, put her phone down on the table, and took a deep breath. She knew that sometimes change comes not from grand pronouncements, but from a moment when people are honest with themselves. That night, she went out onto the balcony and looked out at the city, the lights of New York flowing like a river of light below the horizon. She closed her eyes, heard the wind in her hair, and felt a strange sense of gratitude. All the hurt, all the arguments, all the tears, they had all led her to this moment. A place of peace in her mind, where she no longer had anything to prove to the world. Ava walked into the room, opened her notebook, and wrote, "Justice comes not from anger, but from small acts of kindness. Forgiveness opens the door to both sides, and sometimes what we let go is what saves us." She closed the book, turned off the light, letting the city light into the room. Outside, a gentle breeze blew, carrying the distant yet warm laughter of someone on the street. Ava smiled, knowing that tomorrow, when the sun rose, she would continue on her path, no longer just a CEO, but a storyteller of faith, dignity, and tolerance. It's been almost 2 months since the incident on Flight DL729. Ava Coleman's life has slowly returned to normal, but the echoes of the story have never faded. Every week, her inbox is filled with letters from all over the United States. Women who say they found in Ava a new sense of self-worth. Men who say they've learned to listen rather than judge. And young people who write that they dream of one day sitting in the same seat she sits in today. Each letter is like a small heartbeat of society, joining in on a journey Ava never thought she would take on. That morning, Ava arrived at the office early. The conference room was still empty, the morning light reflecting through the glass onto the shiny wooden table. She made herself a cup of ginger tea, then turned on her computer. Her inbox announced a new message, this time from the Global Organization of Women Entrepreneurs. They wanted to honor her at their annual award ceremony with the title Voice of Integrity. Ava read the words over and over again, a strange feeling welling up inside her. She had never thought she needed to be honored, but she knew this award was not just for her, but for all those who had suffered in silence and now found the strength to speak up. At noon, Marcus Lee walked in with a beaming face. "Ava, have you read the news they gave you that award? You should accept it. It's not just a personal recognition." Ava smiled, still stirring her tea. "I don't know. Marcus, I don't want the story to be just a symbol." Marcus sat down opposite, his eyes sincere. "But a symbol doesn't have to be glamorous. A symbol can be a reminder. People need real examples to believe that justice isn't an illusion." She looked at him for a moment and nodded. "You're right. Okay, I'll go." The ceremony was held in Washington, D.C., in the Kennedy Center Grand Ballroom. When Ava walked onto the stage, the applause echoed throughout the auditorium. The lights shone down, glinting off her long pearl-colored gown, which she had chosen for its simplicity and elegance. In the front row were famous faces from the business world, the media, and even the invited students. Ava took the microphone and took a deep breath. "Thank you for this honor," she began, her voice warm and even. "But I don't stand here today as just one person being honored. I stand here for a seat on a plane that someone thought I didn't deserve." And then I realized, over the years, it's not just me. So many people have been denied the seats they deserve, not because of their abilities, but because of prejudice. The room fell silent, only her voice ringing out clearly. "I don't tell this to relive the pain, but to say that every chair can be shared if we are willing to see others as equals. Forgiveness doesn't weaken justice. It makes it more human. And it is humanity that keeps the world from falling apart." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Some people stood up, tears in their eyes. Ava smiled, bowed her head in thanks, and then saw Gregory Mills in the row behind her. He sat silently, not taking his eyes off her, his gaze filled with both gratitude and regret. After the ceremony, Gregory approached and shook her hand. "You spoke well. Ava, I brought my son to hear it. He said he wanted to meet you." A boy of about 14 stepped forward, his blond hair tousled and his eyes bright. "I apologize on behalf of my father, Miss Coleman, and I want to grow up to be like you." Ava bent down and smiled softly. "I just need to grow up and learn to treat others with respect. And that's enough." The boy nodded, and Gregory was silent. He had probably never heard a word of forgiveness carry so much weight. In the evening, Ava returned to the hotel, opened the window, and looked out at the sparkling Potomac River. She sat down at the table and wrote in her notebook, "Justice does not come from fighting alone. It comes when people choose to see each other." She smiled slightly and closed the notebook. The next morning, before returning to New York, Ava received a call from Leah Parker. Leah's voice was filled with excitement. "Ms. Coleman, I'm on my first flight as a team leader. There was an elderly passenger who couldn't find a seat, and I suddenly thought of you. I told him that everyone has a seat here. Just find the right row." They both laughed. Ava said, "You understand the most important thing." "Leah, thank you." That afternoon, when Ava's plane landed in New York, she found a group of reporters waiting in the lobby. But this time, they didn't ask her about the old incident. An older woman came up, gave her a hug, and said, "Thank you for speaking for us." Ava squeezed her hand, only returning a warm smile. As she left the airport, she looked up at the pale blue sky. A plane took off, soaring through the clouds, the sunlight shining through its shiny metal. Ava watched, feeling as if everything had come to a complete end. She had lived through stormy days, seen people in both good and evil, forgiven and healed. That night, she sat in her apartment, next to the window where the city lights shone in. She called her mother, Rosa Coleman. Her mother's voice was as gentle and warm as ever. "I saw you on TV. Ava, you spoke very well. You made me proud." Ava smiled, her voice shaking with emotion. "I was just doing what you taught me, using kindness to light up the darkness."
They were silent for a long time, only listening to the sound of the wind outside. Then Rosa said, "Daughter, you have gone further than I thought, but don't forget, Every journey is only truly meaningful when you stop to love. Ava nodded slightly. I know. Mom. That night, she turned on her computer and reread the articles, the comments, the thank you letters. She realized that her little story was no longer hers alone. It had become part of the collective memory, a testament to the fact that kindness can make a difference. She whispered to herself, If someone asked me what I learned from that flight, I would say that I learned to listen to the world with my heart." Outside the window, the lights of New York were still as bright as the stars. Ava gently closed the curtains, leaving the room in the warm glow of the desk lamp. She sat still, eyes closed, feeling her breathing steady. No more noise from social media, no more cameras, just silence and peace. A journey had ended, but a legacy was beginning. Winter came gently to New York, the streets gradually covered in a gray-white coat of frost and snow. The Nova Terra office was simply decorated with a few string lights and a small Christmas tree, but the air was filled with warmth. Ava Coleman walked in, her wool coat covered in cold air, a cup of hot coffee in her hand. She stopped in front of the notice board in the lobby, where a new poster for the scholarship program the Second Chance Fund was hung. Beneath it was the text, "Giving opportunity to those who deserve it, regardless of their background." Ava gently touched the poster, a small smile on her lips. She remembered Gregory Mills, the man who had hurt her, and now helped start this fund. A few days ago, he emailed her to say he had agreed to teach a short course on ethical business leadership at a community college. Ava read the email and simply replied, "I believe you are on the right track." In fact, she felt a little warm inside. Life is strange. Sometimes mistakes make people become kinder. That morning, Ava had a conference call with her team from London. After the meeting, Marcus walked in, holding an envelope. "Ava, you have an invitation from Delta Airlines. They want you to attend a panel discussion on equity and corporate culture in the airline industry." Ava looked up, a little surprised. Delta Airlines. Marcus nodded. "Yes. They said you don't have to agree, but they really want to hear the story from the inside. And the special thing is, the letter was sent by Leah Parker." Ava raised an eyebrow, then smiled. Leah. That girl never fails to make me proud. 3 days later, Ava flew to Atlanta where it all began. Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was bright in the winter sun, bustling with people as usual. As she stepped out of the gate, Ava felt her heart sink. Every step down the hallway brought back memories of that morning, when she had stood still in the middle of first class, trying to stay calm and protect her dignity. But now, her steps were steadier, her eyes bright and peaceful. At the airline's conference hall, the discussion took place in a solemn atmosphere. Leah Parker appeared in a new uniform, her hair neatly tied up, her face radiant. When she saw Ava enter, she walked over and hugged her, unable to hide her emotions. "Ms. Coleman, I still remember the feeling when I first met you. I can't believe that you are sitting here today, as the guest of honor," Ava replied softly. "You are the one who kept everything right that day." "Leah, without you, I probably wouldn't have been able to stand so firmly." The panel was attended by airline executives, employees, and aviation students. Leah hosted the session, telling the story with sincerity and without embellishment. She talked about the silent moment in first class, when one person's choice can change the way the world looks. When Ava's turn came to speak, the room became strangely quiet. She stood up, looked around, and said, "I'm not here to recount an incident, but to remind us that sometimes we just need to listen.
Respect costs nothing, but it can save a heart from being broken. A young employee raised her hand and asked, "If you could go back to that moment, what would you do differently?" Ava thought for a moment, then replied, "I think I would have stood there, calm as before, because if I had gotten angry, this story would have ended in chaos, not in a lesson. Sometimes true strength lies in calm." The audience applauded. Leah looked at her eyes sparkling with pride. As the program ended, the airline director came over to shake Ava's hand. "Thank you, Ms. Coleman. Your story has made us look at how we treat our customers and our colleagues. We are implementing a new training program inspired by it," Ava replied. "If it helps others feel more respected, I'm happy to share anything." In the evening, Ava took the flight back to New York, this time in first class. When she entered, the lights in the cabin were warm, the leather seats were fragrant, and soft background music was playing. She looked at her seat number 2A. She smiled slightly, walked over, and sat down. The flight attendant serving her today was none other than Leah. She came over and said softly, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Coleman." Ava looked at her, her eyes filled with a long journey. "Thank you, Leah. This time, you got the right seat." They both laughed, a light but deep smile. As the plane took off, Ava looked out the window, watching the city of Atlanta shrink below. The sunset streaked across the clouds, dyeing the sky a fiery orange. In that moment, she felt as if she had come full circle. It had all started with a seat, and now it was ending with a seat, but in peace and forgiveness. Ava opened her notebook and wrote, "No one is born to be doubted. But if they are, live in such a way the world will think again. True strength is when you don't have to prove anything. Just show up." She closed her notebook and closed her eyes to rest, letting the sound of the engine and the feeling of flying lull her into a short nap, as peaceful as her heart at that moment. When the plane landed, passengers began to stand up to retrieve their luggage. Ava remained seated for a few minutes, waiting for everyone to go first. Leah approached and whispered, "You know, I used to think that fairness was a luxury, but today I understand. It only takes one person to believe." Ava replied, "Yes, Leah. And sometimes that person doesn't have to scream, just stand firm." Leaving the airport, Ava took a taxi home. The city at night was bright. The flashing lights reflected on the car windows. She looked at the bustling people outside, her heart filled with peace. Life was no longer a battle to prove one's worth, but a journey to spread kindness. She knew that everyone had their own flight, and what mattered was not the seat you sat in, but how you faced the world during that journey. That evening, Ava called Marcus to tell him about the trip. Marcus laughed. "Looks like Leah is flying high." Ava replied, Me, and probably Gregory too. We're all flying, just in different ways." Marcus paused, then said, "Maybe it's your calmness that makes everyone want to be better." Ava smiled. "If that's the case, I think the flight was worth it." When the call ended, Ava stood by the window, looking out at the night sky. Another plane had just taken off, its lights flashing in the darkness. She whispered to herself, "In the end, every journey will get you where you need to go if you have the patience and faith." And she believed she had gotten there. On a late-year morning, New York City is covered in a silvery coat of snow. On Fifth Avenue, windows filled with Christmas lights reflect off the wet pavement. Ava Coleman wakes up early, steps out onto her balcony, and takes a deep breath. The air is bitterly cold, but strangely alive. She has just returned from a busy day working on Novaterra's new project, a youth leadership training program called the Listening Project. The idea stems from a lesson she learned that fairness begins with listening. She made a cup of tea and turned on the radio. The announcer's voice was soft, talking about inspirational stories from the past year. In the midst of the news, Ava heard her name, Ava Coleman. The black woman who was overbooked on Flight DL729 has become a symbol of determination and compassion in leadership. She has initiated a series of social programs that have helped change the way people view fairness in business. Ava smiled, sipped her tea. A feeling of peace crept into her heart. That morning, Marcus Lee stopped by. He brought a bouquet of white lilies and a handwritten letter. "From Gregory Mills," he said, placing it on the table. Ava opened the letter, which read neatly, "I just finished my first semester of a leadership ethics class. I told my students that my biggest mistake was not listening. One student asked me if I regretted it. I said not only that I regret it, but that I am grateful, because it taught me what I needed to learn. Thank you, Ava." At the bottom, he signed his name carefully, his handwriting shaking slightly, as if carrying the sincerity of someone who has gone through many events. Ava put the letter down, her eyes filling with tears. "He really changed," Marcus said. Ava nodded, her voice low. "Yes, and that is what makes this story worthwhile." In the afternoon, Ava attended a virtual conference with thousands of attendees from around the world. She was invited to share the topic Leadership with Grace. When it was her turn to speak, she said, "I don't believe in being perfect. I believe in being sincere. A good leader is not someone who is always right, but someone who is willing to admit mistakes, willing to listen, and knows how to put people before themselves." She looked at the screen and saw hundreds of faces around the world watching intently. If my story makes someone choose to be kinder, even for a moment, then I think that seat, that flight, was not in vain. When it ended, the virtual auditorium erupted with applause like a stream of sound through the screen. That evening, Ava received a call from Leah Parker. Leah's voice was filled with excitement. "Ms. Coleman, I've been chosen to be the keynote speaker for Delta Airlines' 50th anniversary celebration. They want to honor employees who are making positive cultural changes. I wanted to ask you, would you mind if I told your story?" Ava laughed, her voice warm. "You don't have to tell me, Leah. Tell me about what you've learned, about how you believed in what was right. Your story is your own story now, without the shadow of anyone else." Leah paused for a moment, then said, "I understand, but for me, you're still the one who started it." She hung up, still feeling grateful and loving toward the young woman. That night, Ava sat in her small study. Outside, snow fell silently over the city. She opened her notebook and wrote, "In the end, we are not remembered for where we sat, but for how we made others feel when we were there." She paused, looked at the words, then put down her pen. The light from the desk lamp reflected off the page, highlighting each stroke of ink, like a reminder to herself. The next day, Ava visited her mother. Rosa Coleman still lived in the small house in suburban Virginia, filled with the smell of apple pie and soft jazz. When her daughter walked in, Rosa smiled gently. "You came without warning again." Ava hugged her mother, feeling the familiar warmth. "I miss you," she said, her eyes stinging. They sat by the window, watching the snow fall outside. Rosa put her hand on her daughter's. "I've watched everything you did. You've made so many people see the world with new eyes. Ava bowed her head, her voice choking. I'm just doing what you taught me, that no one is small when they know how to love. Rosa nodded slightly, her eyes filled with pride. In the evening, Ava sat by the fire with her mother, telling the story of Leah, of Gregory, of Marcus. Rosa listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes pensive. When the story ended, she said, You know, Ava, everyone has their own flight. Some fly high, some fly low. But the important thing is that they don't forget to look down to help someone who is still learning to take off. Ava was silent, taking in every word. In that moment, she saw clearly the journey she had taken, from a morning in Atlanta full of prejudice to a peaceful night here in her mother's arms. Everything seemed to come full circle, not an end, but a return. Late at night, Ava stepped out onto the porch and looked up at the starry sky. The winter sky was clear and still. She remembered every face that had walked through the story, Leah with her bright smile, Marcus with his unwavering faith, Gregory with his remorseful eyes, and her mother with her unconditional love. She knew they were all part of her healing journey. She said softly, as if talking to herself, If one day I can no longer fly, then I hope others will continue to fly higher, farther, and with more kindness. The words melted into the wind, blending into the peaceful space of the night. Ava closed her eyes, smiled, her heart filled with peace. A month later, Novaterra's The Listening Project was launched nationwide. Hundreds of businesses participated. Thousands of employees were trained in listening skills, fairness, and empathy in leadership. On the big screen at the launch ceremony, the image of Ava Coleman, the founder, who was once displaced, who is now making way for new generations to step up, was shown. The announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium. Her story goes beyond just one flight and becomes proof that kindness can change the world. Everyone stood up and applauded loudly. In the front row, Leah and Marcus sat side by side, their proud eyes looking up at the stage. In the corner of the auditorium, Gregory and his son smiled quietly, and Ava, backstage, just stood there, watching, saying nothing, because sometimes silence is the best way to honor good things. The ceremony ended with soft music. As the lights dimmed, Ava stepped outside and looked up at the New York night sky, the sky where she had feared, where she had fallen, where she had found herself. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the cold of snow and the warm scent of hope. She whispered, I've flown far enough. Now it's time for someone else to fly. And with that smile, Ava Coleman closed her story, a story not just about justice, but also about faith, compassion, and the power of listening. Ava Coleman's story is not just an incident on a flight, but a mirror of society. It shows us that true strength lies not in shouting for justice, but in remaining calm in the face of injustice. When the world is noisy, sometimes just one person holding on to dignity will make the whole society look back at itself. Ava's message for each of us, especially those who have been through a lot in life, is choose to be kind, even when others are not. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength for those who know their own worth. In every relationship, in every conflict, when we listen instead of judging, we sow the seeds of change. Everyone has their own flight, and sometimes just a small action, a word, a look, is enough to make the world a better place. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you feel something touches your heart, please like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to spread humane and hopeful stories. Because who knows, one day you will be the one to bring light to others.